Hey folks, welcome to Any Which Wargame. I'm Buzz, and today we're going to be talking about the latest offering from Nordic Weasel Games, Mystic Space. Nordic Weasel Games, I think it's pretty fair to say, is known for its games that are kind of directed towards the solo gamer. They're usually campaign-based games, and they tend to have a loose setting that people can adapt to pretty much whatever they like. Mystic Space has just been released over on Wargame Vault in public alpha, and I got myself a copy of it, and I think it sounds really cool and exciting, so I wanted to just have a chat about it and kind of let everybody know that, yeah, there's another Nordic Weasel game out there, and it's something a little bit different. So, as I mentioned before, it's a departure from the usual offerings we get from Nordic Weasel games in that it is a very solid setting. It takes place in a remote galaxy among stars almost invisible to our telescopes, according to the game text. This is not a peaceful galaxy ruled by reason and prosperity. It's a galaxy riven by war and grand visions of the future in conflict with each other. But it is also a galaxy full of promise for the future, where bravery can change the course of unwritten history. So that's taken straight from the document. And basically, what it's telling us and what other writing I've seen about the game says is that this is not grimdark. It's a galaxy that has conflict for sure, but it's also hopeful as well. It isn't full of factions who are so opposed to each other that there's no chance of everybody ever getting along and it's unending war forever or anything like that. It's not the absolute grim darkness of Warhammer 40K. It's not the kind of grimdark light or diet grimdark of Grimdark Future as talked about in the Grimdark Future World book. It's something else. And I think in a genre, sci-fi wargaming that is, that seems to be dominated by grimdark, it's nice to have something deliberately step aside from that and go, actually, we're going to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to talk a bit about the game. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rules, but not kind of too much. I'm going to be giving kind of overviews of things. I'm much more interested at this point to talk about anyway, the story. So the first thing to know is that Mystic Space is intended to be an ongoing story, and I'm going to read verbatim from the PDF. The world of Mystic Space will develop over time. The rulebook begins in the year 3000. As the timeline advances, new troops, weapons, artifacts, or spells will appear in the game world while others may fade into the past. The story itself will also advance as truths are discovered and conflicts play out. This allows you to keep up on an exciting adventure that feels alive as you play. With time, players will also be able to play in their favorite time periods. The various army list information will be clearly marked with the years they're suitable for, so you can remain at a specific point of the timeline or progress slower if you prefer, or go back in time and play a historical game in the setting. So, as far as I know, that's quite a unique concept for a war game to take, to kind of have this unfolding story, but also be able to play at separate points within it. And, I can already hear people saying, well, 40K is set in, this time period, 40,000 years into, or close enough to 40,000 years into the future. And you can play at kind of any point between the Horus Heresy and whatever their current is. And that kind of used to be true back before they really started fleshing out and advancing the story, but now it's kind of like your battles kind of by default take place in the present of 40K, which I think is actually turned into 41K, technically. Another cool thing that I want to touch on before I dive into the actual story is the Mystic Space license. So you buy a copy of Mystic Space, and it also grants you two creative licenses that allow you some rights. And you need to buy Mystic Space through the Wargame Vault website or get one directly from Ivan, who is the person who writes these games, Nordic Weasel Games. So there's two licenses. There's a Mystic Space fan license and a Mystic Space commercial license. So the fan license says you can create and share fan art using Mystic Space characters and setting and fan fiction. You can create rules conversions, allowing the use of Mystic Space troops and characters in other game systems, including role-playing games. You can publish your own Mystic Space material on your blog or website. You can create companion apps, army list programs, and similar tools, provided they do not largely replace the need to own the rulebook in order to play. And any material created using that fan license must either be non-commercial or released under a pay what you want model, where the recipient has an option to pay nothing. A lot of these things are kind of implied, kind of just by owning the game anyway, but I like that it's been spelled out. The other license is the Mystic Space commercial license. Okay, so here's what this one says. You may create and sell miniatures and STLs usable for Mystic Space. These may be marketed as suitable for Mystic Space or as specific troop types, heroes, or faction troops. They must either specifically be made for use with Mystic Space or must be existing figures that are usable as Mystic Space unit types. Unit packs do not have to contain exact numbers of figures, but, for example, weapon options must be viable for the unit in question. You may create scenarios and campaigns in digital and physical formats. You may include Mystic Space stats in multi-system scenarios. Material created using the commercial license may be given away or sold for profit. So right away, those out there among us who have some skill with making STLs and making 3D models can go, oh cool, I'm going to dive into this game and see what I can make for some of these various factions. And hey, I'll be able to sell them, and that'll be really cool. And there won't be any kind of legal repercussions for doing so. Ivan's telling us, yeah, absolutely do this. And it's a very cool thing, very refreshing thing to see. There's a good taste clause, which is pretty easy to adhere to. All material created under this license must be in good taste, such as avoiding gratuitous gore or serving primarily as erotica. And, fair enough, we can get that stuff from elsewhere if we really need to. So let's talk a little bit about the story. So the people inhabiting this galaxy, they're almost humans. They're not humans. They kind of talk like us and behave like us, but they're not us. They're called the Starborn, and they're slightly taller. They live longer. The average lifespan is about 100, and they don't really age noticeably until they're in their 50s. They rarely get sick, and they feel heightened states of emotion. So these strong emotions that we have of love and anger and passion and loss, they feel them exponentially stronger than we do. And as the text says, this can result in lifelong loyalties, but equally lengthy rivalries and feuds. So the story goes that in this galaxy, many worlds emerged at the same time with these Starborn, and they had rapid technological progression. They ventured out into the stars and discovered other Starborn. And this went well at first, but quickly descended into open conflict. And kind of a large part of the reason for that and for the ensuing kind of devastation was because they were so technologically quick. They didn't have the time to learn these kind of doctrines and ways of being that would allow them to kind of live with each other. And so from this, 8 factions arose, each embodying a way of thinking and a way of life. So the factions are very much based upon ideology and philosophy rather than a kind of us versus them or, death to the Xenos or something like that. These are philosophies that people adhere to. As mentioned, there's 8 factions: the Promised, Terrorhold, the Fallen, the Apex, the Deadwake, the Verdant Hand, the Orphans, and the Pathfinders. And the rulebook goes to give some information about each of these factions. It tells us what their home world is, some historical data on how they kind of came to be, their mythology. Like, for example, I'm going to read a little bit here from the book about the Promised. Under mythology, the promised believe not only have they made a promise to themselves, but all of the Starborn to show a better existence from all, free from the vulnerability of plagues, through methods that show all can thrive and live with a shared future, a future that will be one of everlasting prosperity and peace. The promised believe that a future is found within the stars through exploration, through reading the constellations not just from their homeworld, but as they travel, gaining new insights into the patterns of the galaxy. From that, they also believe with all of their rituals and traditions, a Telism and a group of ascendants will rise that will lead them to that final promise. And the kind of preceding information told us what Telism and ascendants are. We've also got social data that tells us a bit about the day to day. So, for example, this is from the social data section of the Terrahold faction. Terrahold's populace organizes itself in large city-states. Much like a wheel with spokes, there is a central capital with several smaller, different districts coming out from it. Between the great city-states, smaller communities exist as well, but each has a connection to one of the city-states around them. The view of the city-states is that each one works together to keep the world moving. While each city-state will have a specific focus, like food production, medical, engineering, etc., there is always a crossing of skills and trade between the groups, so that it not only ensures that one particular trade doesn't suffer from in-group myopia, but also that each city-state will have what it needs to function. There is a sense of connection between all of the city-states, with each one tied closely with each other that avoids infighting. If one wheel on a cart breaks, after all, the others soon will as well. That's not to say that all cities are alike. Some are based in construction of great sleek buildings at the height of modern engineering, while others are an ingenious network of homes within mountain cave systems, utilizing geothermal energy, or another at the colder pole of the world that subsists in a never icy existence that nevertheless achieves comfort within a harsh climate. It also details something of that faction's military approach as well. For example, this is from the rulebook about the Fallen. In combat, Fallen commanders emphasize disrupting enemy actions and decision-making ability. This emphasizes an approach based on deception and stealth and disengaging before getting bogged down in a grinding battle where their lack of resources will put them at a disadvantage. A fast attack launched from a position of surprise allows damage to be inflicted before the force can disengage and avoid the counterattack. The battlefield is often stripped of leftover weapons and wrecked material afterwards. It then tells us what the troop color scheme is. For example, fallen troops wear white and green. So we get this great level of detail for each faction, and for an alpha, this is really cool. It's really in depth. I'm only kind of scratching the surface of it here because, I don't want to read word for word what you really should be paying to go and see yourself. But I'm really impressed with the level of world building that Nordic Weasel Games has put into these factions. They feel like they're fleshed out. They feel like they're quite unique, both from each other and from a lot of other kind of tropes within the sci-fi wargaming world. What I also like about them in terms of the hobby is that they're all, for all intents and purposes, humans, as in I can print out my human defense force troops from one-page rules, I can use my Imperial Guard from 40K, or I can use, kind of generic sci-fi humans from any setting and just paint them in different colors to represent the faction's color scheme. And there you go. I can print out, say, the same, 20 or 30 models and have enough models for 8 factions. So, to talk a little bit more about the story and the setting, as the Starborn spread through the galaxy, they discovered a material called Element 511, and this allowed the development of paranormal talents. So it's kind of their magic system. And, being dramatic, as the Starborn tend to be, they call these abilities magic, even though they're actually well understood by science. The rulebook goes on to detail things like the system of communications and how far that reaches, and the system of faster than light travel and how far you can travel and how long it takes depending on what kind of engine and what kind of drive you have. It's really in depth. Again, it's really in depth, especially for an alpha. It could be a really good setting to play a sci-fi role-playing game in, and it's going to be a really awesome setting to watch unfold as well, given that we have this solid grounding of how the universe works and kind of what its laws are. So there are cybernetics, and they are given as enhancements, kind of when soldiers lose a limb or something, it can be replaced with a cybernetic one, things like that. And the book clearly says there is a limit to how much the biological baseline can be enhanced, and that's kind of something that the Starborn have discovered. So yes, there is cybernetics, but no, it doesn't make you, a superpowered god or anything like that. They have AI called helpers for things like space combat and drones and that sort of thing. So the helpers will take over in a close range space combat where everything's happening so fast that the Starborn's reactions aren't quick enough. And things like that. Drones, and they help out with their combat vehicles, which we'll get to in a second. Here's a little about what the rulebook says about helpers. Ground warfare tends to be a little more low-tech, with helpers mainly employed to ensure tactical awareness. Group troops have an excellent view of the battlefield, nearby threats, and analysis of possible enemy plans, all relate to them in real time from observation drones and helper-operated scanning modules. The helper also filters through the information and prioritizes for the troops in the field, preventing information overload. So I mentioned combat vehicles just now, and something quite unique about this game is that there are no tanks. There are no kind of what we would look at and go, oh, look, that's a tank. All such things in this game are bipedal machines called vassals. So think a dreadnought from 40K, think maybe a Gundam or even a Metal Gear from the Metal Gear Solid series. It has a pilot and also an AI helper that can handle things like self-repairs. The helper can even continue combat for a short time if the pilot is killed before retreating to like a preset waypoint. So the typical combat vassal is about twice the height of a foot soldier, and some feature hands that allow it to pick things up, and lots of them have weapons attached all over them. So yeah, basically think of them as a kind of a walking tank. I've very much got a standard kind of old style 40K dreadnought in mind when I think about these vassals. But it could just as easily be something like, an Eldar Wraith Lord or something like that. Just any sort of walking machine covered in guns, or maybe it's close combat oriented. To talk a little bit about the game itself and its mechanics, so the focus here is on heroes and leaders. So a squad is led by a unit leader, and the way that it works is the unit leader moves. It'll have a movement of, say, 5 inches or 6 inches or whatever, and the unit leader is the one that you measure for and move. And then the rest of the squad is redeployed, typically within 3 inches of that unit leader to kind of signify like the leader's the really important one here, and everyone just kind of moves around him. So this means that a model can potentially move further than that movement allowance. But it also means that, yeah, the real focus here is on that unit leader. It's a game with alternating activations, which I absolutely love. I don't think there's a game that I'd play anymore, except for when I'm playing Third Ed Old Hammer, that doesn't have alternating activations. So great to see, not surprising to see, but great to see nonetheless. When a hero activates, you can also activate an infantry squad within command range, which is usually 6 inches. And there's all sorts of rules for things like close combat, where heroes will seek out heroes and have kind of heroic combat. It's very much a focus on, the honor of single-handed combat and things like that. The system uses a D10, which I kind of prefer over a D6 system because, percentages and whatnot, and I think it just gives a lot more scope for different results. Close combat is ongoing. Unlike Grimdark Future or other one-page rules games where close combat isn't ongoing, you kind of clash and then you move back if one side or the other hasn't died. The morale system is a particularly good one, and it's based on casualties suffered. but the effects of that can be mitigated by doing certain things. So if you suffer casualty, you get a panic marker, and the number of panic markers dictates what that unit can do. It might prevent them from moving, it might prevent them from moving and shooting, it might make them break and run, but it all depends on the morale roll, and there are things you can do to mitigate it. I know that some people really don't like morale at all in their war games, and each to their own, but I really like having some way to represent the fact that these are people of some description or another, or, maybe mindless creatures, whatever, but these are beings who are getting shot at and watching their comrades die, and I think having some way to represent the psychological effect of that is good. And I think that the morale system in Mystic Space is a particularly good one. I haven't played it yet, but yeah, on paper it sounds good. There's the usual assortment of special rules for weapons and, things like that. There's a simple but interesting magic system. The alpha just has generic magic. It doesn't have faction-specific magic yet, but that'll be coming with more updates. It also has a very easy to understand way to build your army using points and a very easy to understand force org to make sure that it's relatively balanced, to make sure that you haven't got, two infantry squads and a hero against five heroes and eight vassals, for example. Another thing that's very cool about this game is that it's built to be played in either skirmish or large-scale battle mode, and each mode has its own force org chart. So I've been playing mainly skirmish games for the last 12 months now, and I'm really enjoying the idea that I can play this game and watch the story unfold and have a couple of, patrols of skirmish size and have the outcome of those battles make some sort of difference to a large scale battle that might happen. Maybe some supply lines have been disrupted and that'll affect the defending army or something like that. And as I mentioned earlier, the units will evolve over time as the story unfolds. Units from certain time periods will be invalid to play in a game set in a different time period. And, as I said, that's really ambitious and I love the idea of it. The rulebook has seven starting scenarios in it that have a really good variety of objectives. So you can roll up a scenario to play, or you can pick one, and I think that'll go a long way towards keeping the gaming experience fresh. It's designed for a 3 by 3 table, although it says 3 by 5 for larger games is recommended. So I've talked a little bit about the world building that Nordic Weasel Games has put into this game, into Mystic Space, and I want to talk now about Flashpoint stories. And I'm going to read here directly from the rulebook. Flashpoints. The galaxy is large, and there are nearly 1,000 worlds populated by the Starborn. Expansion occurs in an uneven fashion as the movement of troops, colonists, and survey teams ebb and flow, and newly discovered worlds are quickly contested by interested parties. As a result, it's rare for a given habitable region of space to feature every faction in strength. A flashpoint sector is a region of space with two or more habitable worlds in relatively close proximity to each other, mutually accessible by standard ships, and which are currently contested by at least three factions. It can serve as a microcosm of the game's setting. In a way, you can think of each flashpoint as its own television series within the overall cinematic universe. The rules then go on to detail how to create your own flashpoint and carve out a small part of the Mystic Space setting for yourself. It says a flashpoint serves as a location and conflict to anchor the game setting and rules into, providing context for your battles. The difference between the Apex and Fallen fighting a random battle versus the Fallen launching a raid to disrupt fuel refinery facilities on the moon of Eltnir 6 can be significant. It goes on to say things like when you play battle set in a flashpoint, each game can be anchored into your ongoing story. Since you know the locations that are in dispute and the events that have gone before, you can fit each game played into the narrative. And that's really what this whole concept of flashpoints is driving. It's getting the players involved in the story and the unfolding narrative And of course, that's a very Nordic Weasel Games thing to do, is to have this ongoing narrative and not just playing games in isolation. And I really love the way that they're connecting their universe and showing us how to really break it down and insert ourselves into it and watch it unfold. And, as time passes and more time periods are entered into the game, it'll be really interesting to see what happens to those flashpoints. Maybe it'll be taken over by the Fallen and, 300, 400, 1,000 years into the future, maybe the Verdant Hand has come in and taken over, and what's the story and how that happened. And being primarily a story-driven gamer myself, this appeals to me hugely. Like, I don't care if I'm playing a video game, a role-playing game, a tabletop war game. I need the story, and I need to know what's happening and why and what the context is. There's very few times where I'm literally just putting down models and rolling some dice and packing it up without thinking about the actual story of what's happening. Even in a tournament setting, which is rare for me to enter into, but even in a tournament setting, even if it's just in my head, there's a story going on. And I love that we've got this inbuilt way to really engage with this universe and its story. So that's it. That's my first look at Mystic Space by Nordic Weasel Games. I haven't played it yet, but I'm going to within the next couple of days, and I'm going to release another video kind of reporting back on how the game went. I'm excited for a game like this to come out that's deliberately not grimdark, that has a new take on the sci-fi wargaming genre, and that is going to be such a fun thing to watch unfold, to watch that unfolding narrative. So, thanks very much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and leave a comment down below. Tell me, what Nordic Weasel games have you played? Why have you enjoyed them? And do you think you'll give this game a try? If not, why not? If so, why? Alright, until next time, let's roll some dice.